Welcome. It's a great pleasure to welcome Tim Ingold to our lecture series, a T-Space lecture series. I'm Irene Tsakrelia. I'm running the residency program for the Stephen Myron Hall Foundation, along with the great help by Nathan Hawks, who is also here with us. All our residents are on the panel, and I will pass it on to them to further introduce Tim and moderate the conversation. Thank you.
Great pleasure to introduce Professor Tim Ingold. Across his remarkable career, Professor Ingold has transformed how we understand the relationship between people, materials, environments, and the process of making. He works across anthropology, archaeology, art, architecture, and education, encouraging us to see knowledge not as something detached from the world, but as something developed through movement, observation, and participation and practice. This is one of the most influential thinkers in contemporary anthropology, as emeritus professor of social anthropology at the University of Aberdeen. His influential books includes line making, the lives of lines, and the perception of environment. Please join me in warming welcoming Professor Tim Ingold.
Hey, well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to talk with you. And my talk is called "How the World Makes Itself Heard." There's an old philosophical riddle that goes like this: if a tree falls in the forest and no one is there, does it still make a sound? The answer, of course, is that it all depends on what we mean by sound. If we mean mechanical vibrations emitted from an energetic source within a certain frequency range and transmitted through a conducting medium, then surely the falling tree will make a sound as its heavy trunk strikes the ground, sending shock waves through both earth and air. But if by sound we mean a certain human perception brought about through the stimulation of a particular sensory organ, the ear, and the receipt of neural impulses by processing centers in the brain, then clearly there can be no sound without someone with ears and a brain to register it. There's no denying that in ordinary usage, these two meanings of sound are often confused, such as when we speak of the speed of sound as if the noise we actually hear had ridden the waves from its source to our ears, covering the distance in a measured time. Yet it is also symptomatic of the poverty of much philosophical debate around these matters that it offers no other option. Sound can only be either in the world or in the mind, either physical or psychic. But what if it were neither one nor the other? What if, in order to get at the root of our experience of sound, we have to set these binaries aside? And to achieve this, we have first to drop the peculiar logical detachment of the thought experiment, so beloved of philosophers, and plunge into the experiential maelstrom of the world itself. Suppose, then, that you are walking in the forest in a howling gale. It is dusk, and the light, already dimmed by heavy cloud, is fading fast. As it darkens, the ambience seems to thicken, as the lightness and transparency of sunlit air gives way to something closer to a viscous fluid. The trees, whose shapes, textures, and colors had shown up so clearly in broad daylight, are now but a shadowy presence. You have to peer through the gloaming to make them out. But from all around you, you hear the creak of branches as they rub against one another and as the wind tears through their leaves. You feel like a mariner at sea, listening out for the creaking timbers of his vessel as it is tossed by the swell. as the mariner finds himself cast in a realm of ocean and sky, for you likewise, earth and atmosphere together comprise a world in flux. It's a world in which things are not already laid out, like objects and properties on a stage, but from which they are forever emergent, as folds or crumples of the flux itself. Such is the ocean wave that the mariner hears in his creaking timbers, and such is the gust of wind for you, heard in the creak of tree limbs. Then, all of a sudden, a massive gust comes roaring out of nowhere. A splintering crack, at first hesitant, intensifies into a crash like that of a breaking wave, shortly followed by a thud so heavy that it takes you in the pit of the stomach. The very earth seems to shake, and in that moment of the trees falling, you are as swept up in the melee as is the mariner whose ship is about to capsize. Your entire existence borne along in the turbulence of a milieu that is simultaneously cosmic and affective. This milieu is what we call atmosphere. Sound then is neither physical nor psychic, but atmospheric. It is an implosion of the milieu that rends the flesh of your own being as much as of the world. It's not as though when it falls, the tree makes a sound, which is subsequently broken off from its source and dispatched like a package for you, the recipient, to unpack its significance. Rather, the sound is the atmospheric event of the trees falling. The circumstances of your being there, in that particular place and at that moment, inevitably makes you a perhaps unwilling accomplice in the tree's final spasm. The sound itself is an index of your complicity. Perhaps as you look back on the event in the cool light of day, you might explain that, yes, you heard a loud sound and guessed it must be of a falling tree. This is the logic of abduction. By intuiting the extraordinary event, the outcome follows with mechanical inevitability. But that's not how it was for you, as seized in the passion of the moment, you are overwhelmed by its sheer intensity. Let me adduce another example. Suppose it's not the trees falling that you hear, but a rumble of thunder. Compared to the suddenness of the crash when the tree hits the ground, the rumble is a more drawn-out affair, alternately rising and fading in volume. And whereas the crash appears to erupt from an epicenter somewhere in the woods, the rumble echoes around the entire sky. The proximate cause of the sound lies in the explosive blast of air superheated by a lightning bolt. We're all familiar with the fact that in our perception, the flash of lightning precedes the rumble of thunder by a measurable interval that allows us to estimate how distant the storm is from where we stand. This is because compression waves are transmitted through air roughly 1 million times slower than electromagnetic rays. Where the rays reach us almost instantaneously, the compression waves take their time, approximately 5 seconds for every mile or 3 for every kilometer. So the rumble that fills your ears, like the flash that dazzles your eyes, is, however, of an entirely different order. It's fair to say that there would be no rumble without ears and no flash without eyes. Yet it would be wrong to conclude that thunder and lightning exist only in the mind, as objects of perception. Indeed, They are not really objects at all, but rather the reverberations of a consciousness that, far from having closed off from a world out there, has opened up to the boundless expanse of the sky. And this means having to think quite differently about ears. Now, anatomically, of course, the ears are organs of exquisite design, delicately primed to respond to vibratory stimuli and firmly cemented on each side of the head. And the head is a hard, bony cavity inside which lies the soft material of the brain. The ears then function as transducers, picking up vibrations impinging from outside and converting them into neural impulses for interior processing. But in our experience of hearing, there is no inside or outside. Where anatomically our head should be, there lies the world. So what then becomes of the ears? Have they, along with the head, dissolved into the ether? Or have they rather merged with our listening? If, as I have suggested, sound is not so much an object we hear as the underside of our own experience of hearing, and if this is what it means to be possessed of ears, then a walk in the woods on a stormy eve would find ourselves literally in a forest of ears, all around and above. Every creaking branch, every falling tree, every fold of the thunderous sky would be listening to you, even in the passion of your listening to them. No one, of course, would be so foolish as to think that ears actually grow on the branches of trees, or that they float like flying saucers in the sky. This is not the point. It's a question not of anatomy, but of effect. And at this point, I'd just like to introduce this picture here. It's called The Tilled Field by Joan Miró, a great Spanish painter. And it's what I like about it is that, as you see, there's a big ear growing on the trunk of the tree. And Miró, although it's slightly surrealistic, Miro's point is that this is affective, a sensory landscape, not an objective, empirical one. And as we'll see, the ear on the tree symbolizes the tree's listening rather than the idea that the tree has an ear. And I'll go on to explain what that actually means. So to get to the bottom of it, we could imagine ourselves set down, as in real life with the ethnographer Bronislaw Malinowski, on the island of Kiriwina, one of the islands of the Trobriand archipelago off the eastern tip of Papua New Guinea, where we are witness to the performance of garden magic. For those of you who are not anthropologists, Malinowski's study of the Trobriand Islands is one of those classics that we've all grown up on. So that's why I'm referring to it here. It's done in the 1920s and 1930s. So the magician, squatting alone in the corner of the garden, planted with the staple crop of yams, addresses both the soil and the yams whose abundance he aims to secure. And as he launches his words, rumbles of thunder and gusty winds, which are common in this season, portend that the world is listening and that the words have been received. In due time, the yams will swell below ground, while above, in the luxuriant growth of vines and drooping foliage, attest to a plentiful crop. The islanders are convinced of the beneficial effect of their magic, but to their ethnographer, it remains an enigma. They surely cannot seriously believe that the mere utterance of esoteric words causes plants to grow. Plants, as Malinowski acknowledged, have no ears, but people do. Could it be, he wondered, that the magic works its effect precisely because words intended for plant beings that have no ears actually fall on the ears of beings, namely human, for whom they are not intended. But then, if that's the reason, then why would the magician sit all alone in the garden with no one else within earshot? The real answer, I would suggest, is that by lending his voice to the chorus of earth and atmosphere, the magician brings about a kind of affective resonance, a commingling of energies wherein lies the potential of the cosmos to generate new life. But as he listens for a response from the thunder and the winds, he lends his ears as well. Because it's by way of the ears that meteorological phenomena such as these can assume an audible presence. And likewise, to return to the tree falling in the storm, by lending your ears to the tree, you create the conditions for its cry to be heard. You give the tree a voice that it would not otherwise have. And thanks to your presence, the tree can listen both to itself and to everything around through you. And if the idea of lending an ear to the tree appears surreal, as indeed it is in this picture by Miro, it's no more so than asking others to lend theirs, as did Mark Antony when, in Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar, he exhorted his fellow Romans to lend me your ears. You may know the phrase, friends, Romans, and countrymen, lend me your ears. Famous line from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar when Mark Antony gets up to give his speech. What on earth did he mean? He didn't ask his audience to part with their organs of hearing. He rather asked them to give him a voice and let it be heard, to align their attention with what he has to say, to draw them in. So the ear, in this sense, is the attentiveness of a body placed on oral alert. That's to say, not so much a body with ears as an ear body, a body on oral alert, an ear body. So how do you turn a body with ears into an ear body? Well, you have first to decompose it anatomically so that it can then be reconstituted as something like a tissue of affects. Now, this is not a surgical operation, of course, but a switch of perspective from acoustics to phenomenology, or from objectification to experience. The ears, thenceforth, are no longer the organs of a body, but the affective dispositions of a body without organs. In this perspective, the body is not a self-contained entity enclosed by an external skin and set over and against the surrounding world, but a kind of probe, an antenna, that feels its way into the folds and along the creases of the crumpled atmosphere, threading through the milieu much as a plant root or fungal hypha threads its way through the earth. Recall that the ear body finds itself in a viscous medium in which things are not already given in objective forms, but have to be made out. Making out is an act of differentiation, of discerning shapes and contours from within the flux in which all are primordially immersed. So to hear a sound is not to identify an object or an episode of this or that kind, this a falling tree, that a rumble of thunder, but to enter into the grain of the event, cleaving it from within and to follow where it leads. It is, in effect, to trace a line. Now, this is a line of sound, but it is not a line of transmission. These respective lines of sound and transmission have quite different properties, and it is crucial to recognize the distinction between them. line of transmission connects an energetic source with a sensor. The sensor could be a human ear, but it could just as well be some kind of recording device. This is what we have in mind when we say, as we commonly do, that sound travels from A to B, or that it reaches our ears from someplace far off. We imagine the line to be straight, though it may in fact be bent on account of variations in atmospheric density, deceiving us into supposing that the source to be much closer or further away than it actually is. In any case, the time it takes is a multiple of the distance traveled. Compression waves travel through air under normal pressure and in a temperature of around 20 degrees Celsius at approximately 343 meters per second. That's the line of transmission, going, say, from a source to my ear. The line of sound, by contrast, does not connect points, but lasts or carries on in real time along a path that twists and turns with continuous variations of pitch, timbre, and amplitude. How fast then does it travel? Well, this is really the wrong question to ask, because in truth, the sound is not going anywhere. More like a gust of wind, it rises and fades in the midst. Its line has tempo, but not speed. A tempo not so much measured as felt. So take yourself back to the woods on that stormy night. Walking along the woodland trail, you hear the rhythmic pulse of your own steps, moderated by the textures of the ground underfoot, whether hard or soft, gravelly or squelchy, mingled with the sounds of the wind in the trees, the creaking branches, distant thunder, and all the other phenomena to which you lend your ears, bringing them thus into audible presence. So how should this earthly and atmospheric chorus be described? Well, many would call it a soundscape, imagined as the sonic counterpart of the visible landscape. But I'm not convinced that the term soundscape is entirely apt. For we don't hear the chorus as, say, we see the landscape, already arrayed around and about. Nor can it ever be recorded and replayed as a complete composition, because it is ever unfolding in the contrapuntal interweaving of multiple strands that can only be unraveled and individuated from the inside. The shapes of sound, as I've observed, can only be made out. And in making them out, we make out ourselves as well. Like figures in the mist, both we and they have no substance apart from that of the milieu, in the folds and creases of which all existence is suspended. To listen is continually to be reminded that the ears are more than mere portals through which the human mind can take possession of a world. They are, more fundamentally, vectors of attention, by way of which the world can take possession of us. And it's in doing so, in taking possession of its human inhabitants, that the world makes itself heard. So that's how the world in Miro's picture makes itself heard, and he's shown this by giving the tree an ear, and of course he's given it an eye as well, you can see in the foliage at the top. And I wonder, are human beings exceptional in this regard? And I believe they are, thanks to the world's bestowal upon them of a priceless gift, namely the gift of language. Now, this is not language as commonly understood by linguists. It is rather the language of poets, a system not of signs, but of resonances. Language in this sense begins with listening. Only because we listen can the world speak to us with voices of its own. For it is in our ears and ours alone that these voices come to life. The creak of the trees, the howl of the wind, the roar of thunder. And it is in our ears, too, that they are joined in chorus, moving us to respond in speech and song, dressed in the resonant idioms of poetry and myth. Much that in classical anthropological literature goes by the name of magic, shamanism, or spirit possession, consists in responses of this kind. So, what if we were to seek the roots of language here, in responsiveness to possession, and in the responsibility that goes with it to maintain the choral counterpoint in some kind of harmony? This responsibility does not make humans dominant over other creatures. On the contrary, it leaves them exposed and vulnerable. But it does make them exceptional. And could this combination of vulnerability and exceptionality, finally, give us an answer to the riddle of the Trobriand magician, couched in the corner of the field amidst abundant crops? He is not, in the first place, speaking, but listening. Literally spellbound, he is caught in a resonant web of voices, to which he then responds with his own. And I'll conclude there, rather short, I'm afraid, but I hope it's enough to generate some questions and discussion. Thank you very much.
Absolutely beautiful way, Tim, to bring together aspects of resonance that we haven't considered so far as part of the lecture series. We had a poet, we had artists, we had scientists talk to us, musicians, composers, and I think what you offered is bringing a new dimension into the conversation and about listening. And I was feeling like an earbuddy while listening to you, and it's very interesting to open it up to questions from our residents. Thank you very much.
Hi, Tim. My name is Jackie. My first takeaway is that our world would look very differently if people listened to landscape more attunely. And I was kind of curious. I don't know if you have like, not necessarily suggestions, but how does one, what would be like the first step to actually listening to a landscape, would you say?
I think the first thing I would put all the technology aside. The worst thing is to arrive with all kinds of recorders and things on your thing, like what you've got on your head and all this stuff, and think that the whole point about listening to a landscape is recording it. It's got nothing to do with, in fact, once you record it and then play it back, you've lost most of it. It's no longer the same as what you hear when you're out there. So the first thing would simply be to set all that aside, forget any idea of recording, or just as if you were doing visually, put the camera aside, simply look, and put the recorder aside and simply listen, and then maybe think about how you might want to respond to it, artistically, musically, any other way. I think that's the answer. That I've been a bit bothered about particularly with the popularity of the idea of landscape and people making sound recordings as they go along, that they're missing something really rather important. And so that instead of actually opening up to the world around them, they're trying to capture that world so that they can play it back.
Mm.
It sort of turns the thing around in the wrong direction, and I would want to get it going back in the right direction again. If that makes sense.
It does, yeah. It's a beautiful sentiment because I do think that a lot of experiences of listening to nature is taking something, an aspect of something, and giving it to the world, which often does this other thing of defamiliarizing the experience, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, so if you want to if you have the problem of, well, how am I can experience, I can go out into the world somewhere and listen and do all that, but how am I supposed to share it with other people? And the thing most people think, oh, I better record it and then I can put the recording out somewhere. But I think the way to do it is actually not to share what you've heard with other people, but simply to put it out to other people that they can go and listen in their own place. They can do it too, rather than having you to say precisely what you've heard, to package it and send it off to somebody else. Just say, why don't you listen too? And then we can have a conversation about what each of us have been hearing.
Thank you, Tim.
Hi, Jim. I think the last part you just talked about how makers can translate this experience of listening um, resonates with me, and I think with a lot of people in this group, especially since we're, always responding to a site, an environment, given conditions. Yeah, and I guess I don't really have a question. Um, that's just what I was thinking, and it's interesting because I recently read an article where game designers are going out to very remote parts of the world and trying to somehow translate these landscapes into a digital infrastructure, I guess, where people can experience it, but like trying to grasp, I guess, what you were saying, like extract that environment instead of allowing people to experience it themselves. And I just found some connection there, but I really appreciated your talk.
Yeah, I don't know. My youngest son is a games designer, and so he's probably had experience of this kind of thing. But uh, my feeling is that if you're into that sort of thing, if you're a games designer, or for that matter, if you're a writer, a poet, or a novelist or something, then it's part of your skill, your craft to create an atmosphere. But you're creating it. I don't really see the need to go somewhere and take it from somewhere else, or exoticize it. Your craft is presumably to create something that is convincing for a reader or a player, and you don't have to go to the other end of the earth to do that.
Hello, Tim, Benedict. So the last two questions or statements in response or in resonance to your answers to it made me think about one other lecturer we had. That was Erica Hunt. She's a poet, and she showed us a video actually made by her daughter. And after that, all of us were asked to also comment what startled us in the way how that video was made. And I think, and somehow now the last two questions or statements were linking to that as well. So let me try to formulate a question out of that. So is for you resonance as well the moment of having experienced the voices of the world to also transform them into something, and vice versa? Like,
So the question is, what do we actually mean by resonance? Is it? Is that
more or less what is resonance for you?
Yeah, it is a term that I use now and again and quite like it. Many other people do, like Helmut. What's the guy? I keep forgetting his name. Who's written a book on resonance. But for me, I think I want to take it in a fairly literal way. That is literally when I've also used a lot in my writing the word correspondence, and correspondence means going along together with something else and responding to it as you go. So if you imagine two melodic lines in counterpoint, they're carrying on together and responding to one another, so they're corresponding. And in a way, resonance is a particular form of correspondence when maybe the phase what's the right word now, when they're in phase, where two movements are that much in phase that they actually set each other off. I mean, that's say the literal meaning of resonance in music. For example, if you on my cello, if I play on one string, if I play on the lower string, say an A, then my open A string will resonate. It'll start vibrating in resonance to the first one. So they set off one another because they have matching frequencies. That's the literal meaning of resonance. So I would take resonance to be correspondence of the specific form that happens when there is when the two movements that are corresponding are actually in phase with one another, something like that.
But it is with what you described now is with a human interaction as well. Like it is something you said that spoke about the physical resonance now, but still it's your movement that pulls the string, right?
Absolutely, yes. So and then you can expand it a bit metaphorically and say, maybe if you're talking about a human relationship, two people going along together, and sort of them bumping off one another in a sense of corresponding movements, then you can say they resonate. I mean, for example, if you watch people walking, often it's a funny thing that watching people simply walking down the street side by side, and they're just not thinking about it, they're just walking, maybe having a bit of a conversation, and you watch their feet, it turns out that they're completely in phase with one another when they're not even thinking about it. And it's a bit of a mystery as to how they do that. It probably involves something to do with peripheral vision and some, but it shows that there's somehow between two bodies going along together, they are actually resonating, because otherwise their legs would be all out of phase. So this happens, and I think it happens more than we think.
Thank you.
It's interesting that the question or the observation of lines comes up quite a bit in the discussion about correspondence. Just the last discussion with Anne Lindbergh about lines, and you're bringing in lines of sound, lines of attention, vectors. I think you mentioned vectors. It's interesting that I mean, architectural line carries energy, but it's very interesting to me that the notion of a line comes back into the conversation so frequently.
Well, as you know, I'm a bit obsessed with lines, but also I think it's really important to make this distinction that I made, because it's so often being confused when people talk about not just sound, but also it's exactly the same problem with light. That let's take the case of light. Imagine you've got a candle, and the candle is a burning flame. And often you get pictures of candles with a burning flame on Christmas cards and things like that. And conventionally, you have there's the candle, there's the flame coming up, and then there are lots of lines coming out, straight lines coming out sort of from some point in the center of the flame. And we know that conventionally, we don't actually see those in real life, but we know, oh, those are the rays. So the candle flame is producing light. There are rays of light that are then issuing out in all directions in straight lines from that source. And then you ask people, well, which of these is the light? Is it the flame or is it the rays? And of course, they have completely different properties. The rays are rather abstract. They're absolutely straight and so on. The flame is all moving. It's a bit twirly-whirly. It responds to atmospheric disturbances and so on. So there's the line of the flame and there's the line of the rays, and they're quite different. And the flame is what we experience as the shining, the flickering maybe of the candle. And it's something that goes on in real time, and it's something that goes on in our awareness. We don't have to be aware of the rays at all. We simply notice that the surfaces are illuminated. And it's just the same with sound. So if you were a sound engineer and you'd be concerned with the properties of a space in terms of transmission and acoustics, then you'd be listening. Here's a source of sound here. To what extent is it picked up by a receptor there? And you'd imagine the straight line from the source to the receptor, and you'd be interested in the mechanics of all of that. But perhaps you're designing a concert hall, right? But now suppose you're a musician performing in the hall, and you're performing a piece. You might be a singer, or like me, a cello player, and you're performing a melody. And that melody, that there's also a melodic line, which is, we say, oh yes, there's this sound, and it goes up and it goes down, and in pitch and volume and amplitude and so on. So there's this sound with all its modulations. It's not going in a straight line. It's twiggling around all over the place, meandering this way and that. So if that is the line of sound, then it's something completely different from that line of transmission that the acoustic engineer is dealing with. It's exactly the same with the difference between the flame of the candle and the rays. It's amazing how often these two senses get confused. So I've tried to explain, for example, this sense of light as something like a flame to a physicist. And they say, oh yes, but we have the speed of light. I say, look, the speed of light does not apply to the flame. It applies to the rays. It makes no sense. And it's the same with sound. People often get mixed up, think, oh, sound travels in waves. And then they see the rhythm of music and they muddle up the rhythm of the music. So boom, 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 boom. And so it must be that the waves are going in that frequency. But it's a completely different thing. And it's so important not to muddle these two things up. And that's one of the things I was trying to get across.
For me, that really speaks about resonance, right?
Yes.
Is that like transfer of line, or not transfer, but the lines that emit from, let's say, the flame,
Yeah, the thing is that the resonance in the light case would apply, be a different word than resonance, whatever it is, would apply to the flame and not to the rays.
Mm-hmm.
Rays don't resonate with anything. they're simply energetic emissions. And the same thing, a line of transmission for the sound engineer, that's not resonating with anything. It might set a resonance off, but that we shouldn't confuse the conditions. I mean, obviously, you're not going to hear anything unless there's some vibrations in the media. You're not going to see anything unless there's some energetic radiation. But one shouldn't confuse the conditions that make an experience possible with the shape of the experience itself. I think, Irini, you're muted. You are muted.
Maybe Irene, maybe you can just leave and rejoin. Okay. In the meantime, were there any other thoughts or questions that anyone else had here? Well, we'll give her a minute. So, go ahead. Go ahead, Hope.
If there's a systematic way of translating the sensation of sound into other senses, like visuals or other possibilities.
Say that again. I didn't quite get it.
Like translating the perception of sound to other like to visuals or to other ways of perception.
I think there are a lot of commonalities. For example, in much of the literature on sensory perception, a big boundary is drawn between vision and hearing, and they're treated as really quite different. It's always assumed that hearing, which is often equated with sound, is participatory, immersive. The world, you're in a sort of sea of sound, whereas vision is objective, looking at something rather than being immersed in it. And I think that that's actually a false contrast, because if we compare, because hearing is equated with sound, but vision is equated with the sight of things. And if one compared the experience of sound with the experience of light, not with seeing things, but the experience of light itself, then they're not so very different. And the same goes for touch and feeling as well. So I think that I'm sort of against the idea of parceling up the different senses, vision, hearing, touch, and supposing that each of them has different properties, because certainly in our experience, they're all so melded together that it's really almost impossible to split them apart. And you think, how on earth would that be possible if they had such different properties? And I think that we sort of touch here, see, we touch here, see all at once is in a totality, and we don't have to split them apart in order to experience the world, nor do we experience a great kind of friction but between them. I mean, they seem to run together without any kind of obstruction. So for that reason, I think there's a lot of transferability between the senses, and I'm kind of against the idea of trying to contrast them.
So would you say, and somehow their combination, their multitude together can even work best in a combination? like in a way
No, I mean
to.
that it's true that in ordinary life, and assuming no impairment, that they work hand in hand. So, for example, when you are listening to a sound coming from somewhere, I mean, suppose you're listening to some bird song, and you're thinking, where is that bird that's singing? And you automatically move your head so as to balance the auditory input of the two ears, which means then that your eyes are facing directly towards where the sound at least ought to be coming from. So that in everyday life, you hear, oh, what was that? And you hear something, you want to identify it visually, you're already looking in just about the right way. So these things do work together. I've argued also somewhere that there is a kind of difference between listening and hearing, in that listening is active, it's attentive. You could say that hearing is a bit more passive. You can to hear is just to allow the sound to kind of wash over you. Oh yeah, you're hearing. But listening is actually attending to something quite specific and deliberately, and it could be argued that in order to turn hearing into focused listening, it does help to be able to see as well. I mean, there's this great discussion was actually launched by Igor Stravinsky about whether or not, if you are watching some kind of musical operatic kind of staged thing involving sorry, if not even that, if you're simply listening to an orchestra play, does it matter whether or not you can see the players? Is it okay to listen to a symphony with your eyes closed? And Stravinsky said, no, it is not okay. He said you must have the instrumentalists on stage so everybody can see, and they're supposed to be actually watching closely at what is going on, because if they don't do that, they'll just let the music wash over them. So like kind of comfort stuff. It'll go in one ear and out the other. It will say, oh, that was nice, or that wasn't nice. They won't really be listening to the music, because there are other people who take the other line and say, no, if you're really going to concentrate on the music, then you have to close your eyes, make sure you don't see everything, and be completely locked in the world. But I tend to be with Stravinsky on that one. But I think that music demands sort of 100% sensory commitment. That means that if you can see, you should be watching.
That's so funny. I like even the experience of watching you give it felt more like a performance to me. I had this notion of like, I think I need to close my eyes to fully take in what Tim has to say, but I opted not to do that, in part because this is being recorded and I didn't want it to seem like I was dozing off. But the moment that I looked at you and not the visual aid, I could see the words come alive in a different way. And that was really interesting to me. Something that I'm always kind of curious about is like, as people who make things and we're trying to respond, like, how do we negotiate reinterpretation? Rather than like leading with our desires for something, uh, how do we engage? Like, I guess it's like really about active listening. I don't know. I don't know if there's like a real example or like a how-to to it, but it just kind of it came up for me.
Well, there isn't a how-to it's the same with watching as with listening. How do you become a good observer, learn to pay attention to things? That I mean that the trouble is at the moment, of course, is that all the technology is taking us in completely the other direction, so that it's trying to do everything it can to substitute for our powers of attention. and simply feed ready-made input into the head. I mean, that all the, you know, now with virtual goggles and goodness knows what. I mean, that you know what I mean. That it seems like the tech industry is hell-bent on making sure that we should pay as little attention to our surroundings or anybody else as possible in order that we should then continue consuming their products. I think it's really important that somehow we manage to turn this around, because it's doing a huge amount of damage, particularly to young people, children. But how we do it, goodness knows.
I recently read something that kind of talked about how even the process for architects moving into a digital platform has really changed the built environment, because rarely are individuals desiring new forms. They're always kind of starting with the ready-made in terms of like Rhino, of like what objects are easily available. And it's just interesting about how technology kind of makes users of it not really trust themselves, or like trust the curiosity experience.
I'm a technophobe. I hate all this stuff, and so it's but I think that if you go into anywhere in a city, you can immediately see which buildings have been designed using CAD. I mean, it's just kind of obvious. Oh, that one's been designed on a computer. That one hasn't, and you can immediately tell the difference. I'm not quite sure how, but it's sort of intuitive. And usually the ones designed on the computer are kind of stupid. They don't make any sense in terms of the materials. And anyway, yeah.
I'm interested always when it comes to software, how to try to misuse it or use it in a way that is not necessarily intended to do. So you find the limits, go a little bit beyond what the technology and the software is really designed to do, and start experimenting with it. It's an interesting threshold. What I was trying to say earlier is I found the choice of the painting, the Miro's painting, a very beautiful fit for your presentation. And I was looking it up, and there was a quote Miro wrote while he was working on this particular painting. And he says, I have managed to escape into the absolute of nature, which I thought speaks very much into the immersive experience you were describing, letting go and be part of nature, letting go of presumptions and merge into the absolute as a very individual experience, perhaps. So it's interesting, the collective versus the individual, what that sharing is that you suggested.
Yeah, I think that Miro is, I don't know exactly what was going through Miro's head, and I haven't read what he wrote about it, but to me it conveys certainly a shared sensibility. I mean, it's called the tilled field, and he's bringing to mind a sort of peasant, a farm, the house, the trees, the fields, and everything. And I think he's bringing to mind the sense, the multi-sensory environment of maybe it's the sort that he grew up in, of a rural a rural settlement, and that's something that would be familiar to anybody who's grown up in that kind of environment. So, you know, if you do grow up in that sort of environment, then every tree, every stone, sort of you know it's like an old friend, and it's speaking to you, and I think he's getting that across, trying to say, how am I going to depict in paint a landscape, not as some kind of pictorial way and say there's a tree, there's a house, there's a field, but how am I going to present this in such a way as to show that that when I'm there, I feel that I'm being listened to, I'm being watched, but actually the listening and the watching is made possible because I'm there. And that I think is, well, for me, that's what that painting's about. And I've never seen anything that does it better. I like it very much.
True, great. That may be a beautiful place to stop, unless there is any additional final comments or thoughts. That I think was a beautiful way to end the lecture series for this year. It is the last lecture on the theme. And thank you very much for carrying us with you on this travel about resonance listening actively. Very much appreciated, Tim.
Thank you for having me. Yep. Okay, well, all the best. I shall say goodbye now.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you.